It's a great pleasure to be here. This is, as Philippa said, the third installment of our AI and the Planet series. The first event focused on AI's materiality, its impact on planetary boundaries. A couple of weeks ago, we covered AI's impact on democracy, so small topics thus far. Today, we're being particularly ambitious. What does it mean to be human in the quote unquote age of AI? I'm very grateful. I feel very privileged to be joined by Professor Luis de Miranda. I've come to know Luis over the last year or so, thanks to some involvement in Philosophical Health International, and I'm not going to get too much into that right now, but yeah, Luis, it's really fantastic to be here with you and to be sharing perspective. Today. Before we
My
kick off,
pleasure.
though, I'm wondering, I don't want to attempt to introduce you. You've got a very rich, diverse background, and you've been publishing absolutely prolifically on many of these critical and sort of perennial topics. Are you able to give us maybe in just a couple of minutes or so a little bit of an introduction to who you are, where you've come from, and what your focus areas are today?
Thank you, Nate. Yes, I'll keep it brief. So I've started writing books quite early, and they were novels actually. Some of them speculative fiction, where I was already um, imagining what society has become, not only in terms of um, socio-technical devices, but also the evolution of the so-called human essence or human condition. Because my novels were considered too philosophical, I just dropped the fiction part after a while and moved on into essays. And later in life, when I thought I could handle the not necessarily always creative atmosphere, I joined academia, did my PhD at the University of Edinburgh. And then life has taken me to Sweden, where I reside since 2017. So I work now at the intersection of bioethics and what I call bios ethicos, right? Which is perhaps the real philosophical origin. My PhD is in philosophy. I'm a philosopher of bioethics, which is the ethics of the good life. In Edinburgh, until then, in Sweden, I've worked with a lot of computer scientists. That's how I got interested and also was able to um, do a lot of collaborations. What was most surprising for me already in 2017, 18 was that most computer scientists, and that was before the explosion that we know today, told me that they didn't really fully understand the technology that they were working with. So this was, of course, surprising. At the same time, that made computer scientists quite close to philosophers, because we could say philosophers also don't fully understand the nature of reality. Physicists also. So that's a form of humility. And here we are today, right? Using these tools that even the companies that um, commercialize them multiply claims through their CEOs to basically declare that they don't know much about what's going on. These declarations can be actually formulated in a pseudo positive way by saying, like we saw the CEO of Anthropic a few days ago, but this happens monthly. Oh, I think our tool has become uh, aware, etc., which is, I think, good marketing more than anything else. So that was for the introduction, and perhaps we can dive in the question of the relationship between AI and humans.
Thank you, Luis. Maybe I kick off with one of the observations that you ended up having Batman come in and comment on shortly after Wendy's observation. This this sort of notion, and I think what I would like to do perhaps is start getting a little bit into the leading work that you've been doing on philosophical health, and the notion of purpose arose to prominence toward the end of that short clip. Um, and I'm wondering if a couple of ways that maybe a couple of paths we could sort of go down, many paths we could go down, but there's two particularly. I'm sort of at a fork right now. One is that there's a part of me that's tempted to perhaps define a few terms and use that to sort of navigate the territory for 25 mins or so. Um, I'm thinking I would like to do that, and much of your work is um, grounded in a uh, central sort of cosmological organizing principle, the creal, the creative real. And the philosophical health work that you've been leading for a number of years now, which very thankfully, I've been fortunate to participate in as of late. It feels like again this perennial thing that we've sort of been working on, but um, it feels like there's this crescendo type moment at the minute, and we're here in presence with one another, obviously intermediated by a satellite. And I'm just wondering, like, if okay, so pushing to the side dimensions of health that we may commonly think of. What do we mean by philosophical health? Can we use that to sort of ground perhaps the next 20-25 minutes? What is philosophical health when you refer to philosophical health, Luis?
Right. So you talked about cosmology, and I think this is a good way to start. So first, a simple definition is we all have values, a worldview, and perhaps even theories of mind, of the world, etc. And when this are remain too implicit, they might be in contradiction with our actions. So the sort of adequation, the coherence between our actions and our thinking, that's the sort of the core of philosophical health. Now, once we've said that, this is sort of the ethical definition, right? But in fact, since you mentioned cosmology and the creative real, etc., I think there's also an ontological, but which actually might be shown to be almost cognitive in human beings, which is we have a relationship with the cosmos in terms of at least our curiosity, a sense of the sublime. And in my work, which is not only theoretical, because I have a lot of interventions with young people and mostly non-philosophers of all ages, what I've discovered is that there is a sort of a cognitive muscle that we have, that our society has made quite numb, but that is very much more easy to reactivate than thought through these philosophical dialogues. And that's what used to be called the relationship between the macrocosm and the microcosm, right? So the sense that we have a presence in the universe that is perhaps a relationship of order, perhaps an adequation, perhaps some form of correspondence between whatever we think the cosmos is doing in terms of finality and who we are. And many people that I counsel, that I work with, discover that this is present in them. This used to be called by the Greek philosophers theosis, right? Our aspiration to become divine. And I think that, I mean, we're starting quite speculatively, but I think this is one of the aspects that technology is has a tendency to erase, because it's a very secular machine, right? So it's sort of it's in a way more anthropocentric than humanity itself. And why? Well, it has been fed by anthropocentric material, right? So I would say that to answer your question and to conclude this first segment would be that, well, philosophical health is beyond physical health, beyond even the psychological adjustment that we call psychological health. Is this relationship with the sublime, with a certain sense of awe for the greater order, whatever that is. Doesn't need to be, of course, a received God, that drives perhaps our epic instinct to always aim for something of a shared cosmology, something that could be a civilization, even if it's always projected in the future, but it can be made a little bit more explicit through dialogue, through philosophical dialogue.
This connection to the sublime. So there's a paper that you published in 2020 from analytics to crealectics, artificial intelligence and philosophical creativity. And in it, you draw a distinction between analytical intelligence, dialectic intelligence, and crealectic intelligence. And this connection to this drive to the sublime that you're referring to appears to be made possible by what you're referring to as crealectic intelligence. And in the paper, you very clearly describe the differences between what we could justifiably categorize, even the latest foundational models as in the analytical intelligence category. I think most accurately, of course, there are many speculations and stuff like that. But would you mind teasing out for a moment, Luis, what when you refer to these three different modes of intelligence, what are they? And then I think what I'd like to sort of lead to from there is, why does that matter so much in this conversation when we're attempting to journey together through some process towards some type of shared meaning where we better understand, better relate to, better embody perhaps what it truly means to be human and how that differs from our AI overlords like Geek.
Right, and I copied the link to the paper
Oh, great, thank you.
in the chat, but I think some of it is familiar, right? We know what is analytic intelligence. The paper was written in 2020, but I think it's still valid. And so basically analytic intelligence and the three modes of intelligence are very useful. Analytic intelligence divides a situation into known parts, right? And this mostly is the way AI still functions today. And why is it important? Well, because we know that if we are in an engaged relationship with another producer of signs, symbols, and articulation that we interpret as meaning, that will over time shape our thinking. We see that in human relationships, right? If we share our existence with someone on a daily basis, that is not just an exchange of information, right? It transforms us. So if we have regular daily conversations with a machine that is mostly analytic, that might atrophy the other two forms of intelligence in us. So the second one is dialectic intelligence or dialectical intelligence, and this we're also kind of familiar with it, both in its ancient forms by which through dialogue and oppositions we reach as a certain truth or as some sort of agreement regarding the truth or not, but also in its Hegelian variant, very famously, which then these tensions might lead to a form of synthesis. But as we see, very often both analytic intelligence and dialectic intelligence are very deterministic. It's that they sort of presuppose that we unveil a sort of logic of reality, and that's why science is or engineering are very much analytic in at least in as a dominant approach. But of course, the third aspect, which I call crealectic intelligence, which is the form of intelligence that has a relationship to the creative on flow that is that pertains to how reality manifests itself. That is something that probably at the moment, and I don't want to say, I don't want to predict the future, but at the moment, this is something that is not only specifically related to embodied beings and chief among them human beings, but also among human beings, it's something that actually is we do not cultivate or we do not bring to the core of our action. So the relationship with the sublime, the relationship with all admiration, for example, if we look at Descartes' work, Descartes considered that emotion, the core emotion, the primary emotion was admiration, and that we should cultivate admiration because what we sort of attract in our life, what we admire or what we don't admire, and that's very different from envy, which perhaps is how today people might think they are admiring in some cases. So these three modes, of course, most of the time they are articulated together, right? We're both using analytic intelligence, dialectic intelligence, which is also very useful when we interact with other beings. There are attempts by the big AI companies to simulate dialectics, and that's why most of you, if you have an experience with ChatGPT or Cloudy or other AI chatbots, you will notice very often that they formulate oppositions, right? It is not this, but that. And that comes almost as a gimmick. And I think this is the very awkward way these companies have tried to go beyond analytic thinking to introduce some form of dialectic, which is a bit shallow, a bit flat, but we're not in the mode that would imply a relationship with the creative onflow, the mode by which we are aware that reality is not deterministic, but is actually co-created or intercreated by our not only embodied actions, but also extended actions, enacted actions, and embedded relationships, which is, I'm referring now to the something we can talk about maybe a bit later, which is the 4E cognitive frame that distinguish how we interact intelligently with the world, I mean, in an embodied way, in a way that includes the horizon of the Earth, whether that is nature or materiality or even technological materiality. The fact that our intelligence is enacted, right? We understand by doing. For example, for those of you writers, we know that we think something and then we write it and we discover that what we wrote is very different from what we thought in our heads. And the third is of course our embeddedness in cultures. So that mode of intelligence, which has been historically left at the margins as a sort of existential remainder of our cultures, by which, in fact, even human beings are not trained to practices to integrate them into their existence. That as actually is an opportunity today, an opportunity for us to. That's also what I mean by philosophical health, to integrate the creative, cosmological, awe-inducing aspects and admirative aspects of our perception as core modes of how we should go about our everyday life.
A lot of ground there. I'm tempted to sort of uh, utilize that frame to sort of veer off a little um, toward uh, sort of like, on one hand, something like human-machine relations, and on the other, something like what might it mean to thoughtfully, actively, perhaps in uh, at least dialogical or communal settings, cultivate this, and perhaps for some of us, reconnect with our crealectic intelligence and build upon it. And there's a cognitive scientist from the UK, Carl Hayden Smith, that comes to mind, and he has this term that he frames hyperhumanism, and he's very interested in the ways in which certain types of technologies might be able to enhance our innate capacities rather than, or this transhumanism. There's all these different frames, and so I'm thinking, Luis, like what we're here now. We've so when ChatGPT is publicly available since November 22, I think. Um, this feels like a different hype cycle to the AI hype cycles that have come before. Feels qualitatively different in a number of ways, perhaps. Like what can we do? I think is where I'm going with this, Luis. What ought we consider? What practices might we engage in to, one, perhaps cultivate a healthy relationship with these socio-technical systems, recognizing that will mean different things for different people? And what can we do to perhaps deepen our engagement with some of these other capacities that perhaps may well atrophy if we don't courageously go towards them?
Right. So there is a keyword that runs through the history of AI, and that's purpose. We have seen it in the Superman story we showed in the beginning, right? But it's exactly the same discourse. Bill Gates recently had the same view that, well, if AI deploys everywhere, humans won't have purpose. And already when I was working with computer scientists in 2019, one of the popes of AI who wrote all the handbooks, which might be today, of course, a bit outdated, but Stuart Russell wrote this book called Human Compatible, where he also concluded, well, the real problem of AI is not an AI problem, it's not a technological problem. It's the fact that we humans have not been very good at defining shared purpose, defining long-term deep orientation. So that's the provocation that AI is putting. So it's in this sense, we can be strangely thankful to it. So I think when I work with through the sense-making dialogues that I cultivate with various people of various ages, we at one point we reach the sense of purpose discussion, and I have this exercise which is inspired by Pythagorean esoteric tradition, by which we discuss what would their greater purpose be and how would it be aligned with their worldview and what they think the universe is doing. And that's an exercise, as I said earlier, that people find not only very helpful, but they engage in it with actually much more ease than I would have imagined. So that's where we are today, at the very moment where our, I would say, potential civilization, because I don't think we've reached a planetary civilization yet, but our potential civilization is, by design, whether we like it or not, planetary. And so what is the shared cosmology that we can agree upon? And of course, it shouldn't be a new dogma. It should be, I think, something more of a kind of, let's augment the conditions of possibility and compossibility. So compossibility is this word that Leibniz in the 18th century proposed for the fact that to create a world, you need not only possibles, but also to make sure these possibles are not contradictory with each other. They are compossible. And I think that's the very challenge for today. AI is possible, and many technologies are. And if we take out the sort of a marketing hype, as I was mentioning, about is it aware, is not aware, I think we very quickly discover it's just a very powerful tool without others. And it might be helpful in some cases, but it's not going to give us purpose. It's not going to give humanity this shared purpose and shared cosmology that we need for planetary civilization. So I would say that it only functions as a sort of a heuristic provocation for us, whether it's in terms of creative thinking, but also in terms of ethics, right? Teleology. What can we now propose that is beyond the sort of reactive state of affairs that we have now, that takes the place of a global purpose? So I think it's basically good news, and probably I won't be part of the people who think that this presents an existential risk that is higher than the existential risk that we've had before, right? So it's again something that we need to think not in terms of relationship, because are we really in a relationship with AI? I mean, I'm not sure. I think again, it's more that our affordances today are more complex, but we know that once this reaches a certain level of acceptance, it becomes the new normal, and then the sort of the effect of surprise disappears, and it's seen more as a tool that will not replace the need for deep orientation that we now have to co-define at a planetary level.
A call to arms of some description, Luis, to counteract the arms race, the many arms races that we are amidst right now. I realize we're 19 mins until we wrap, and I want to ensure that we have adequate time for the audience to as meaningfully participate as you can in a context like this. So many different directions I would love to go, but Philippa, perhaps you can take over if you don't mind and just steer us through the
Sure.
questions and answers section of like if there aren't any questions, I'm happy to I'll pick Luis's brain all day, but let's see what we can come up with.
Oh, well, firstly, does anyone have any questions? I'm not seeing a lot of comments in the chat. Oh, but actually, nope, some are popping up now. So Eric has said he wants to pick up on your point, Luis, about moving towards a global civilization. Do you think a seeming rise in nationalism is a pushback towards what is becoming a global community?
I think that's very well formulated, and you sort of give the answer in your question, right? We are seemingly going backwards. I think that's a reaction that is temporary, perhaps even in some cases necessary. I would say that to question some of the assumptions we've taken for granted in the last 30 years. But I give it maybe 10, 15 years before things sort of reestablish themselves in somewhere in the middle of course, what nationalism is saying is that the order of capitalism by which the local is destroyed in favor of the surplus value, that doesn't work for humanity. But I think most commonsensical people agree upon that. So I think that's what nationalism is, and it might. I mean, there might be a condition by which it will persist longer, precisely if we do not reach what we're calling here this planetary civilization, right? Which is something that we have not yet been able to establish convincingly. I think the first step for that is some sort of epistemic humility from humanity. And that's why I think it's useful to say, for example, that we are not a civilization yet.
Thank you, Louise. Are there any more questions that anyone else would like to ask? They can be long questions as well. Otherwise, I'll jump in and ask something that's been on my mind since the start of the discussion. Okay. I just wanted to ask you about the comment you made, which was that AI is more anthropocentric than humanity itself. And given that this series is about AI and the planet, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that statement, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So I think that many philosophers have defined humans as a sort of a projected desire into the future. We are defined by what we're not, right? So if on the other hand you have a machine that is basically functioning from our past, everything that we've tried, everything that we've produced during that conversation, that makes it more anthropocentric that we are, because we have this theosis, this projection to become somewhat more divine, so therefore less human, right? And that projection, I mean, we've seen in history, can go wrong, but that's the risk of it, right? That's the feature. But it can go extremely right in many cases, and that's mostly the history of humanity. So let's give a very simple example to illustrate what we're saying. AI, and it's sort of a metaphor, but it's based on a real technological gimmick, is like AI thinks that it is in 2023 most of the time. I don't know if you've noticed, because it leaves, and maybe now the data has been updated to 2024, but its horizon is completely reversed, right? Our horizon is projected in the possible and the compossible of the future. Its horizon is all the data from the past. And very often you will see an AI tell you something that indicates that it thinks we are still 2 years beyond in time. So that's just a sort of a slight metaphor. Of course, that doesn't mean that therefore we cannot use this feature to have some sort of a conversation with our past as a human species. And this is perhaps a healthy way to look at AI, a conversation with our ancestors, but filtered, of course, by all sorts of selection, right? First of all, you don't have people who didn't publish, who had more oral traditions, etc., etc. So with all these caveats in mind, nevertheless, it could be seen as a sort of conversation with our illustrious or less illustrious ancestors.
I'm just going to, and are there any other questions? I'll make sure give the audience a chance to go first. Otherwise, I'm gonna butt in again. Luis, oh, we now let's go destroying a manifest of a height. Oh, I don't think that's a new discovery. That's a pattern that's been playing out for quite a while. But we are seeing more papers published on that topic. I don't know if that's just a comment or something to speak more about. Philippe, did you have a specific question in relation to that topic that you would like to pose? Okay,
Perhaps
cool.
we can very briefly just mention that eugenics is etymologically formed on this Greek root eu, right, which means good. So again, this is very connected to the discourse of ethics. What is the good life, right? So we know that the Greeks had a more positive turn for this, which is eudaimonia. And I'm working today with a model. I'm not going to enter into details, but I think what we should aim for in this planetary civilization is, of course, not eugenics, but eudynamia. And by eudynamia, again, eu means good, dynamis means potential, possible. By eudynamic, I mean a good relationship with the possible, and the compossible as I defined it earlier. So I think this is something we could agree upon at a planetary level, because it doesn't point to a precise dogma. It just says that if we afford better conditions of possibility for all living beings, not only humans, but also curate things such that these possibilities are compossible, then we might be doing something that philosophers have been very preoccupied with since Plato, which is to bring us a little bit closer to paradise on earth, and not beyond our existence.
Just want to add to that very briefly, Luis, before perhaps you can get to Vinod's comment here. The history of eugenics is obviously horrifically problematic and flawed and biased and dogmatic, and there has been a lot of literature over the last few years about the impact that that has had on the ideologies behind a lot of big tech. So I just wanted to add to that. I recognize, Felipe, the end of your comment there about this scares you. Yeah, there's a lot of folks publishing on this, investigating it, trying to do work to counteract it. Not to take away anything that Luis said. Eudynamia for all is is certainly something to aspire towards. Philippa, sorry, back to you. I think we have maybe a comment from Vinod here to work with.
We do. Well, Vinod's just said that in Hinduism, the purpose of every individual is to merge with God, the ultimate consciousness. So whether God exists or not is becoming more and more blurred. So he just wants to know what, well, if you have any comments around the impact of AI in relation to that statement, Luis.
Mm. Right. So this is another way of describing what we have called earlier theosis, where in Western culture is theosis, right? The becoming closer to the divine, which, by the way, is present in Plato's discourses with Socrates. So it's not necessarily something that involves a religion, and we see that in a lot of traditions, of course, including Hinduism. So I think the question would be, what does AI do to this? Well, again, I think not much more than what this book does. I can read this book and see how it helps me advance in the process of theosis that makes humanity sublime, and I can perhaps use a dialogue with AI to do that. But of course, any aspiration that an analytic machine would help us doing what we've defined previously in our conversation as a very different mode, cognitive mode, which is the crealectic. That would be like, I don't know, trying to use a bicycle to fly. That, to my knowledge, has only been done in the movie E.T. and also in some attempts in the earliest 20th century. But it didn't. It doesn't fit in our modality of crealectic intelligence. So we can use analytic tools in this process of theosis, but we shouldn't think that the analytic tools are going to, by some sort of, as I see in the chat here, by some sort of merging would allow us to perform it better. It is important to know and to remember that what I've called in some papers the anthrobotic sort of merging, the fact that we are embedded in digital systems, social systems, algorithmic things. This is not new. And this is what has been called before the mega machine, the fact that you have to produce a society. You need, of course, protocols. You need analytic protocols. To produce pyramids, you need algorithms. You need to tell 100 slaves are doing this simple gesture, 200 are doing, etc. So this sort of ordering of society is not new. It's just gotten, of course, so efficient today that we might be tempted to think that that form of analytic intelligence is enough to give us order, peace, but that's we have many examples in fiction that show that that's a fantasy, and we have seen now in our conversation that's not only a fantasy, that's a logical fallacy, because it's confusing modes of intelligence that are very different and are doing something very different in the human history.
Thank you, Luis. There are a few comments coming through, not so much questions, just wonderful comments. One from Stefan, which I encourage everyone to read, and a reply from Philippe. We are coming close to time now, so I just wondered if there's anything just to end with that either you wanted to mention, Luis, or you wanted to ask Nate or comment on.
Well, I mean, there's this very very well-known Stoic quote by which if we don't know where we're heading, no wind is going to be favorable. And so I would like to end with this idea, which is basically perhaps a nice metaphor for everything that we've been saying today, is like we need to be, of course, attentive, not dismiss the tools we have. I think de-dramatize probably, and then get to the serious work, which is what is the shared purpose we can establish for a planetary civilization.